Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Last week, investigative reporter Tom Robbins and I talked about long-term incarceration, the transformation of Judith Clark, and we viewed a segment of my interview with her. This week, Tom is back, and joining us is Elaine Lord, the former superintendent of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility and a criminologist known for innovative and progressive policies. Judy talked about her in my interview, and this is what she said.
This prison for 20 years was headed by a warden named Elaine Lord. You knew her well. And Lord was a remarkable corrections leader who, one, believed that women are different than men, which they are, and two, that to manage prisons, you have to recognize that they are communities where everyone who lives in them and works in them has to be invested in the community. It can't just be through brute force that you force people to cooperate. And so she said, if there's problems here, you have to help us solve them. And that was our challenge. And for me, that was the challenge to say, oh, this is not, to work on issues that I felt strongly about in ways that were not about they're the enemy and we're right, but saying, where is our common ground? And that started actually when I was in SHU about the mentally ill women. You know, the correctional officials knew it was a problem. They recognized, they knew that they were.
Talked about.
Yes, she knew that prison was not the place for mentally ill women, and certainly SHU wasn't. We went to her and we said, there's stigma, there's fear, there's no information. We want to take on the problems of the AIDS epidemic in here. And she said, okay, you know, I have to trust you, you know. So we said, well, we're going to let you know, we're going to write it all down, we're going to show you what we're doing, we're going to work with you in it. And so here I was, you know, someone who had shifted to say, let's find the common ground where we work together, and let's realize that it's not us and them, you know. And that, in some ways, became my, my spiritual calling, was to realize that in every situation that appears to be a conflict, there is some common humanity that you have to find and allow it to nurture.
It's so nice to have you both here. Special greeting to you.
Thank you.
What is it that you do? How do you look at prison and the role that you play with inmates, and how you managed an environment that allowed Judy Clark to just transform herself?
Well, I think prisons are kind of they are a community. It's like a little village, and so there are opportunities there to make choices and to learn. But too often, when we run prisons, I think we take every opportunity to make a choice or make a decision away from a person. The routine is what gets to everybody. The rules, the constant boredom. And yet it really can be a rich community where people can find themselves, I think, can have opportunities to learn to make decisions that maybe they didn't have opportunities on the outside.
So you're looking at it totally different. I mean, I think what you're looking at is that the punishment is putting a person in prison.
Yes.
And in this community, they should use the time, you and the prisoners should use the time to re-look at yourself and develop into a different person.
Yes, and if we're just oppressive, that's not going to happen, because people react to oppression, and that's a human nature thing. So yes, I think that you can, maybe I was lucky. Bedford had 850 women in it. And many of the male facilities are much larger than that, and they're somewhat structured different. But I think that you can have people working on programs, trying to help each other, whether it's tutoring or whatever, that allows somebody to find out that there's good in them. Because I think a lot of women come in and they're depressed. They've had long histories of violence. So they're not feeling very good about themselves. and then we put them in prison. And then we act as if now we can punish them every day, rather than acting as if going to prison is the punishment. And I think it can change that. So I don't think change happens in a really oppressive environment very well.
Judy said that you believe that women are different from men, which a lot of us do believe there's a difference. You've been into both prisons. Is there a big difference?
I've been in men's prisons as well as women's
that's what I
prisons
mean.
in New York State, and you know, I've got to say that I think that there is a difference, and you know, at Bedford Hills, or at least the descriptions that Judy has given of the time that she was there when she was going through these changes, she talks about how the programs that she was able to get involved with helped take her out of herself and helped her commit herself both through her work with AIDS victims and through the nursery and through college and in her chaplaincy. Guys inside the men's prisons, I think they have the same aspirations to be able to do that. And some of them are lucky enough to do it, but there seem to be fewer programs. And often there's a waiting list to get into good programs. And the overall atmosphere is sort of, the motto is order and control, and safety and control. And so there's much more of a sense of fear that I pick up in men's prisons than there is in.
While you're talking, I have in my the vision of the school system in a way. So the money for programming and stuff isn't per prisoner. It's just the total cost of a program that has to fit into the prison budget. Is that how it goes?
Yes, and I think that, you know, we've had a few years of reducing funds for program. We pay about 90% of the cost of prisons, or at least I think that's what it was when I was there, for security. Because yes, safety is the most important thing. But I would suggest that women are different from men. Men go to prison, I would say, about 10 times more often for severe violence than women. And when women do commit violence, it tends to be within the family, within their social system, which is different from what we think of as stranger crimes on the street. And so I think even from there, you have a different, you don't have to worry so much about violence in a women's prison. I mean, the threat is there, but I would say more often it's from mental illness rather than women. Or as long as they have outlets, as long as, you know, you want to be a good person no matter where you are, even in prison, if you're given a chance. And I think that that's...
I don't want to give up on the men in prison either, though, I have to say that. But if, like in the school system, even though we have these large facilities, could we not break it down into smaller prisons within a bigger prison so you were able to have a smaller group of people that would then be able to have more attention paid to them?
Well, I have to tell you, I used to tell the commissioner that I would think about running a prison for men if I could run it the same way as I ran Bedford. So yes, I think you could. And I didn't mean to to disparage men, just to say that the characteristics are different. You know, the women are more often mothers, which lends a different feel. It's easy to get them concerned about other people. Women can show their feelings more, just culturally. So, you know, there are differences.
So let's talk about people who are serving long terms, and if in fact being in prison has achieved a successful goal. This is men and women. Why are we keeping them there so long? Well,
I don't know. You know, during my years as the superintendent, I mean, I saw changes politically, certainly, changes in our society. And for some reason, I think Americans don't think we're hard on criminals, that we need to be tougher. But I think that we're one of the toughest countries there is. We incarcerate more people than
almost every country.
Almost every country. Yeah. And it puts us in league with China and Tajikistan. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in that league. Russia is decriminalizing and sending people out into the world again. And I think that's something that we have to think about. We are really tough on crime, and we give people very long sentences. And then when they come to parole, they don't get out either. They keep getting hit and hit. So sometimes somebody who gets a 15-year sentence may do 25 or 27 before they're released. And it usually takes people working to try to, write and say, please let this person out. And again, I think, when you look at what brings women to prison, we change. Well, I know when I was 16 years old, I would have never expected to be who I am now, or to be a warden at one point. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but we're not the same.
Yeah.
And people come into prison and they're 18, 19, 20. They're young. And they aren't fully formed. I used to have a sergeant that used to say, hey, we grow people here. Take it easy. You got to give them a chance to grow. And I think that's true. But they do grow. So when you're in your 60s and you've done 20 years or 25, we need to really think about why we're not releasing people.
One of the things I think a lot about in Judy Clark's case has to do with the way in which she has alone of her group, these 60s, 70s radicals who did these erstwhile political crimes and did grievous harm to people, and something she spoke about very eloquently in the clip from last week's show. But you struggle with the idea of how do you address your victims in a crime? And I hear that from other prisoners, not just from Judy Clark. It's obviously under the rules of prison, I believe you're not allowed to write directly to victims of the crime and say something to them. But you look for ways in which to Judy talks about, fix the harm somehow. Are there ways in which prisons do that better or worse, or are there opportunities for that?
Well, I think it's very sad. Again, I think it's a reflection of our society more than the prison, and I think it's law that requires that you not contact your victim. It often happens in the courtroom that people are given orders of protection, or which requires the inmate not to be able to contact them. And I think that's too bad. We have set up such a rigid us and them situation that it almost mandates that you can't have any contact.
Well, there is a movement, isn't there, for reconciliation, where you agree to sit down and meet with the person, the family, and the person who's committed the crime?
Restorative justice.
Yeah, restorative
It is a concept. Is there a role for that? That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I think there certainly is a role for that, but I think that we have to educate the public first, again, and the prosecutors, because it becomes, courts, they're not after truth, they're after conviction. And that means something very, very different, and it sets up that, and other countries don't necessarily do it that way. And so it sets up a very bad dynamic, I think, that we need to look at.
We really have to look at, it's such an enormous change, though, how people view the purpose of prison. Is it just to be retaliatory, just to, keep you there forever? Is it to satisfy your desire for retribution, or is it, in fact, a willingness to allow someone to change? I don't think we have that in the general public. That feeling, that warmer feeling about it.
I totally agree.
No, I think it's out of sight and out of mind. Is that mostly we pay attention to terrible crimes that happen and people who go away, and once they go away, we're surprised to hear about them again. And usually the only times we do hear about them is if they get out and they do something bad. And this creates the cycle in which we have more punitive laws. And look, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are going through this campaign where they're having to talk about this bill from 1994 in which they created more severe sentencing, something that almost every state bought into, so that small crimes became big crimes and became longer sentences. And most of that was done with public support.
Oh, I agree. And I think also that prosecutors got rougher. And I think that's also the point where we kind of lost our thoughts about restorative justice. I think there were some inklings of restorative justice. I went for training in the University of Minnesota But our whole language doesn't seem to set up for that structure. But I think that people, if they were supported a little bit by society, would want to know. They have questions. If somebody kills somebody that they love, they have questions that often aren't answered in court. And the only person that can answer those questions is the perpetrator. But I think we're scared because once and I'm not talking about forgiveness here. I don't think that should even enter into the, and I think that's where it gets off track. But once you begin to try to create a dialogue, then people often see each other as people, as
Judy,
other human beings.
So Judy says, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for mercy. And in this day and age of mass incarceration and now the movement, finally, mostly because it's too expensive, basically. Don't you think that's the motivating factor? There are all kinds of suggestions. I mean, the sentencing laws should be changed. Prosecutors should be less aggressive. Terms, so if the sentencing laws are changed, terms will be lower. What we don't discuss, I think, is violent crimes versus nonviolent crimes. And we use drugs as an example of a nonviolent crime when we know really it's all mixed up together, right? But then there's the thing called clemency and pardon, right? And that, it seems to me, is an awesome power given to a chief executive in most states and certainly to the president. And isn't that purpose to try to correct things that were wrong in the whole process of imprisonment? So that, I mean, if we were to find ways to get people out, if we had these long-termers who most people believe are not going to do harm to society when they get out, I mean, the recidivism rate, everything proves that that's not the case, right? That they are not
people age
violent.
out of violent crime.
Right. So shouldn't we really put more emphasis on the ability of governors, because it's mostly in state prisons, governors to look at how they can readjust the sentences? I mean, that's basically clemency.
Yes, and it is a mercy. And you know, when I started,
it's also common sense.
And common sense, yes. Sometimes things change, and so you want to make people change.
Yeah.
So this is a two-way change.
It's viewed by these chief executives, though, as being so dangerous for them politically, right?
Right. Well, one of the things I'd be curious to hear Elaine's thoughts about is that one of the things that people in both men's and women's prisons talk about was the decline in clemencies in state prison has brought a lack of hope. What kind of role did clemency play when you were the superintendent? Was it important?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even if only one woman got it, it telegraphed through the entire population immediately.
How so?
Well, usually, very often, the person who was up for clemency might be in the visiting room with the supportive family or something. And it used to be that the news would come on Christmas Eve, so they knew when to
be nervous,
to kind of be nervous and to be waiting. And they also knew if there was no word that there were no clemencies, and that was kind of a whole, you could feel the whole depression.
And did that help you as an administrator in management? Was that useful?
Sure.
And how so?
Well, because people believed that if they did make changes and if they did try, somebody was paying attention and somebody would notice. And now there haven't been clemencies to speak of for so long that is not an incentive. I mean, it may be, you know, the carrot at the end of the stick doesn't happen often, but it was there, and now pretty much isn't there.
Does the population know when someone's going to the board?
Yes. Well, they talk together. They know when the boards. It is a community. Whether it's a community for good or for ill, it's a community.
And does someone know when they're at a parole board hearing whether they're going to get parole or not at that moment, or
No.
are they notified later?
They're notified later.
That's a whole nother problem that we have to discuss, right? Parole.
Well, yes. I mean, parole, clemencies have shrank, and parole. It's just tough to make your parole. especially if you're a long-termer.
Those are the
And
people who
that's
should
not
get
fair.
out.
That's right, because if you look at recidivism,
The younger people are the ones who are coming back.
Well, how often are you asked to weigh in on candidates for either clemency or parole? Or were you always asked to weigh in?
well, for clemency, the superintendent does weigh in and writes a letter either in support or not.
Or opposed?
But for parole, no, parole is like a separate kind of entity. At least I didn't have much to do with parole. And
You
in
wrote
fact, the only time, I have this funny story, the only time I ever appeared or asked to appear before the parole board was for a woman who kept refusing to go and was very mentally ill and elderly. And we couldn't get her to go out. Or we couldn't get her to think about going out. And parole wouldn't let her out either. And I went to them. Finally, we had talked her into it. We had to find a nursing home that had that would let her see a menu before she got there. And so then she agreed, and she went before the parole board. And I went and I said, "We have tried. We have worked. We have worked. We have worked to find. She can't be on her own. She needed care all day." Nursing care, and and they denied her parole.
She was turned down.
She was turned down.
And
so,
this was
so
a woman
much
you
goes-
felt did not belong in prison, I take it. There was no useful reason for her to be incarcerated any longer.
That's right. Well, the other thing too is that it is costing us as a society huge. I mean, you have to put the security on top of the medical care and the nursing care for an elderly person,
And mentally
So-
ill.
and she's mentally ill.
What percentage of the population did you think was mentally ill?
Oh, I think a significant percentage. I mean, where we used to send people to mental institutions, we got rid of them all in the 1970s, and now we have
The prisons.
one institution, the prison, and it changes the nature of the prison. And I think that's where the dangerousness comes from. If it's, is that somebody stops taking their medication, and you don't know what they're going to do then. I'm sorry, but when I was young, a woman who killed her children and then tried to kill herself would have been seen as mentally ill. And that is not true now. And I think that's a travesty. When you really want to kill yourself and you can't leave your kids behind, you really were in a devastated position. And all we have is, let's punish her. I don't agree.
You wrote this remarkable recommendation after you had left being superintendent. You wrote a letter of support for Judy Clark's clemency bid. Can you just tell us what you remember saying and why you did that?
Well, I did it because I do believe that she can't even get to the board. And I think it's important. She got the longest time and for being the getaway driver. It's fair. Now, maybe we were angry back then, but we should have gotten over it a little bit by now.
But the judge said that she'll never be able to be rehabilitated. The judge made basically an incorrect decision,
Well,
right?
Again, I think, when you're 20-something, you're not necessarily the same at 67. There's a lot of water under that bridge. A lot of time has happened. She has a daughter. Her daughter is grown and doing wonderful things. It makes you look at yourself, and it makes you make different decisions. And I think Judy has done that. I really, really do. I would not have certainly made that recommendation in the first, 10 years or so. But, there comes a time when people do change. I
And
believe
she's not
that.
the only one. Obviously, you saw this in many other inmates who were very lengthy sentences who had gone through the same kind of transformation of their lives.
Yes. I mean, like you said, people age out. We change. Wisdom comes with age, that's true, and it's true in the prison as well. Mm-hmm. Look at these guys that come out, that weren't even guilty.
Guilty after 30 years. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
20 years. So we're back to the original topic, which was clemency. It seems obvious to me that that's a role that should be proactive instead of this begging and so reluctant.
I do know that people have paid very heavily. Politicians have paid governors. Dukakis is still, the example up there. We just don't let it go. It's, Tom's statement that one person that comes out that doesn't do right, is all over the newspaper, and you should have more women. You should have some women come and sit and that were at Bedford and see what they have to say.
We need some common sense and some courage, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.